This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Have you ever looked at something and felt that there's something visually interesting about it, but it's not quite to the level of being inspiring? It might be that it's not a good fit for your style, or just the framing of everything is not fitting to something that would work in a painting or an illustration. Doing this illustration has changed the way that I look at real-world reference, and it has just opened up so many different possibilities for my art that it makes me really excited to talk about this topic with you guys. I hear so often from you that you would love to start working on your art, but you have no idea what to actually draw. And this is especially true to pretty much any of my live streams. Just look at the chat there, and there's always somebody who is in this situation that I would love to start working, but they don't have an idea yet. I haven't responded to these questions, I think, in a meaningful way, and I wanted to take this video and address it on how I have found this whole new area of doing pretty much endless amount of subjects to draw and paint. And this is not just exclusive to me, this is available to everybody, and it's all around you right now. You might be surrounded by all kinds of inspiration if you just know how to collect and look at it. This is also the first time that I have made a watercolor brush that I actually like, and I will get to that later, and it's a big part of this process of making this illustration. There's a small bridge near my house that is one of my favorite places in all of Finland. Now, a little context here. It might not look like much, but I am just crazy about bridges. Even my final year of work that I made for this end of the school exhibition in art school, that was about rock bridges. All kinds of bridges are super exciting and inspiring to me. I don't know what it is about them. I love the process of designing bridges in drawing format, and I just love being on bridges. For some reason, it just makes me happy. I wish I could explain this better, but I don't know what it is about it. And it doesn't even have to be a big, epic architectural bridge either. Just some planks on a ditch sometimes, which I could call a bridge. That's sometimes enough, and it just makes me super excited. It's like this mini adventure that you can go on, and it's accessible to everybody. I think that's why I love bridges. Or I'm just super easily entertained by normal things. So anyway, out of all the bridges in the world, one of my favorite bridges is just nearby my house. And it's a small bridge. It's like a tiny one, and it's hidden by trees and hills around it. So if you walk by, you might not even notice it if you don't know where to look. And it's going under the train tracks, and it's an actual bridge that is going under the train tracks, and it's built on a stream of flowing water that is also going through this stone tunnel that is going underneath the tracks. And when you walk on that wooden bridge, you can kind of hear the echo of the stone walls because you're in this stone tunnel at the same time. You hear the water, and sometimes you hear the trains going above you. And there's just something about this combination that to me feels like the most magical thing ever. And I've gone on that bridge with some of my friends, and they just don't get it, what's interesting about it, because it's kind of a small thing, and it doesn't look that great in photographs, and I've realized that it's just this feeling and experience that I have, this enthusiasm for bridges and this childlike adventure that this specific bridge triggers in me. That's one of the reasons why I haven't painted this bridge yet, and I realized that time is running out on me to do this, so I decided that now, it's now or never, that I am going to do this bridge, and I'm not going to paint the exact way that it looks, because I could just take a photograph. And there's nothing wrong with plein air painting, that's not the purpose of this video. I want to capture the way that I see this bridge and the way that I feel about this bridge when I'm in there, and the only way to do that is through imagination and also through reference of that actual bridge. For this illustration, the most difficult part in all of the design work was figuring out the camera angle so that I could capture most of the things that I want to see in a single illustration. But when I take photographs of this bridge, everything is kind of like scattered around the surroundings, and it's a very tight space, and some of the details are hidden by trees, so you can't see everything at once. So I decided to kind of like pick and choose all the interesting parts that I like, and then I rearrange them in this scene in a way that I can show most of the things that I find interesting and beautiful in one single illustration. Also, for perspective, I decided to do the same trick that I did for my previous illustration, which meant that I got rid of the vertical vanishing point lines. So all the vertical lines are just like up and down direct vertical lines. And these vertical lines give this illustration an almost like isometric look, kind of like an old point-and-click adventure game, which I think is fitting for this theme because it's the exact kind of feeling of discovery that I want to have in this piece. For drawing, I used my Fast Lines brush. You can get this brush for free by following the settings in this video. The thing I like about this brush is the ability to make light strokes when I add these suggested lines that look almost like shading in some parts, but are more about just describing the volume of the surface. Fast Lines brush has a minimum size cap, which makes it easy to keep the line size consistent throughout. Now, for some people this might be a chunky looking brush, but that just depends on your canvas size. There are few things that I find super daunting to draw. One of them, as some of you already know, is stairs. Stairs aren't that difficult to draw, they just take a whole lot of time and they are just pain to get through. They take a lot of time. But train tracks, this isn't the first time that I'm trying to do train tracks. I have attempted this many times and failed in other illustrations and paintings. There's something about the monotonous line rhythm that I find is really hard to balance in a composition. I think with this piece, it's the first time that I managed to get train tracks in where they aren't kind of ruining the entire composition for me, and for that I'm really happy. But starting this piece and knowing that the train tracks are going to be there, that was a bit scary, I have to admit. And one of the things that I thought that I could kind of censor the train tracks by having a train running on them, so that would cover the actual train tracks. So I actually thought that like having a train in the picture would be easier than to just draw the tracks themselves. That's how much I fear drawing train tracks. And I think I'm glad that I made this decision, because I think the train would have been a bit too much to have in the corner of the image, and especially a moving element. It would have just been very distracting. And when it comes to the mood of this piece, I really like this sort of like more chill, relaxed atmosphere that it has. It almost looks like these are abandoned train tracks with all the moss that is happening there. So I think that ended up working better. And I'm glad that I failed at cramming in the train into an illustration that has no business of having trains in it in the first place. When I was making this illustration, I made several trips to that bridge and took really quick phone photos as reference of all the small details that I could add in, especially in parts where I had kind of like boring areas of like just bridge continuing or just rows of bricks that look kind of boring in the illustration. And when I had these sort of small images of possible details that I could add, I think I got a lot more of the spirit of that place into this illustration. And one thing that I want to say about using reference, and this might be just specific to me, but I love using reference that I have taken very bad photographs of. I mean, I can read what is in these photographs, but when I'm taking reference pictures, I'm not using like a expensive heavy camera like this one. And the reason is this: if I have a reference picture that just looks like a great photograph, like for example a portrait picture of an actual person, if the picture itself is good enough, then why do I need a painting of this? I see that I'm adding no value into this world by just repeating the same thing again. So for me, a fantastic, amazing reference picture that somebody could find on like Pinterest, for example, that to me is useless. But ordinary, mundane picture of an interesting thing, that to me is inspiring, because that makes me feel like I have something to add to what I'm seeing here. I have something to say in addition to this actual picture. So I don't know if you feel this way. I especially feel weird when somebody is using like a known photographer's work and they are just recreating it as a digital painting. I have like nothing against those people, but for me that would seem like the least inspiring thing to put so much work and effort into when you can't even own the piece when it's done. I have a confession to make here. I can't do this like double tap movement that is built into the Apple Pencil. That triggers the eraser in Procreate, and for this illustration it was just a much faster way to fix some of the mistakes that I had, so I kept using it, but this doesn't feel like a natural way for me to move my finger. And more importantly, you have to be super close to the screen for the Apple Pencil to register this change into the eraser mode at all, so I kept failing at it. I don't know if this is a problem that anybody else has, because I haven't seen anybody talk about this online, but for me this seems like a really important feature of the Apple Pencil, but one that I just can't use properly. I would really love to have an actual button on this, but knowing that it's Apple, I don't see it very likely that they will ever add a button to their product when people aren't asking for it. So this might be just me and my anatomy limitation of moving my finger, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if you actually use this eraser mode when you are drawing. But I found that for this illustration, the pain of using it was less than like going over to switch to the eraser mode. So it saved some time, but just slightly. But this feature could be better. I think the range that the iPad registers the movements in Apple Pencil could be longer, so that way I wouldn't have to hover it like millimeters away from the glass. That would make my life so much easier. Once I had all the lines in place, I took all of my plans that I had for colors for this piece and I just trashed all of them. Like that whole blocking that I made in the beginning, that was for colors. Colors that I didn't end up using at all, and I ended up creating a whole new palette for this one. I usually paint in a very high contrast colors, maybe because I don't use line art that often these days, and that approach just wouldn't work for this drawing. I thought about the feeling I want to capture in this illustration, and then an idea of using watercolor brush for this piece came to me. Soft watercolors wouldn't compete with the lines, and what got me excited about this idea is just remembering all the children's illustrated books that I had as a kid. I thought this approach would be an interesting way to play with that nostalgia in my mind in a digital painting. The only problem is that I don't have any watercolor brushes. I tested some of the free ones in Procreate and saw that people sell these entire sets of watercolor brushes online. Now, if you know how I like to paint, you know that I really don't like the idea of having to use 30 brushes to make one painting. So I decided to make one of my own that I could use for the entire painting. When planning this brush, I set the goal of having both size and opacity variety so that the brush could survive the small details, but at the same time have enough scale to do big brush strokes that could bring out that texture that I wanted it to have. At first, I tried some watercolor papers as grain of this brush, but I just didn't feel like it gave that vintage look that I was going for. This is my grandfather's collection of plants that have been identified and dried in this binder, and it's almost 100 years old. And the texture of this binder is just perfect for this brush, so that's why I decided to use this one. Also, this is one of those objects that I really love, so I love the idea of having this as part of my own brushes. Then I started making brush strokes on papers with ink to make the source of the brush. I use ink because high contrast is easier to edit in Photoshop and it dries really fast, so I was able to make several layers on wet papers. This sounds faster than it actually was. I had my entire workroom filled with different kinds of papers with ink stains on them. At one point I just thought that like, have I completely lost it and now I'm pinning this craziness on my creative process, because this entire workroom was completely covered in different papers with just like black marks of ink on them that just were completely abstract splotches. It definitely looked like one of those scenes in every single horror movie when a relative walks in and notices that the room is covered in these disturbing black drawings, and this is what the crazy possessed person has been doing all that time. I don't know what to say about this. I think I would be embarrassed to admit that I went so far, but I'm really happy with the end result, so I'm not really sorry. So whatever, it's part of the creative process. It might look crazy sometimes. I ended up using 9 of the ink stains and stacked them all on top of each other in one composite source image. I did this in multiply blend mode layers. When I put all these elements together and started tweaking the parameters of this brush, instead of using the wetness parameters in the brush settings, I made the color mixing happen in this brush through the small gaps of grain texture. And when I really want to have a gradient like wash that is blended together, I'll just switch to the smudge tool and use the exact same brush at low opacity from there. This way I don't need to waste time by making several brush strokes when I wanted opaque coverage, because wetness always makes every brush stroke quite translucent to have those settings at all. So that's why I didn't use them. Now a quick disclaimer here. I like making brushes. To me, that's a creative process that I enjoy almost as much as I like painting itself. You might not think that a brush is a piece of art, but to me that creative process is a very fun one. Like, it took me most of the day to make this brush, and I really enjoy that process. And if I just completely omitted talking about that when it comes to making this illustration, I don't think that would be an honest way to talk about what this process has been like for me. Now, the reason why this is difficult to talk about is because I don't want to sound like you need my brushes to make art. You don't. Like I said, there are plenty of free brushes already in Procreate, and those were made by professionals, so there's nothing wrong with them. The reason why I like making my own brushes is because I don't like switching to different brushes. I have this very specific one brush method that I like to use often when I'm painting. This is one of the reasons why I love making this brush, because I knew that I want to paint the way that this tool was meant for. I know that the one brush method that I use in a lot of my paintings is not a good fit for everybody. But for me, I like using just one brush, and that's why I love making my own brushes that fit that workflow and allow me to paint that way, which for me personally is faster. But if that's not a method that is fitting for you, and if you love using tons of different brushes for every painting that you make, maybe this isn't the right tool for you. But I don't think this should be a reason why I don't mention this aspect about my art when it comes to my creative process, because it's a huge part of me making this illustration. Not just because I enjoy it, but like, this illustration wouldn't look the way that it does if I didn't do this part, and leaving it out of this video would not make sense. I don't think that would be truthful. I have said that I will make a compilation of the brushes that I have made for my channel members when I have enough brushes that I really like. But I understand that giving such a vague place in time might be irritating to some, so I decided to make an exception with this one brush and put it on my Gumroad page. Link to that is in the description, and as always, the members who support me on this channel will get this one as part of the downloads this month. Instead of setting an inherent blend mode to this brush, I started painting in a different way that I normally do. Normally, watercolor brushes are in multiply blend mode. Instead of setting an inherent blend mode to this brush, I started painting in a different way that I normally do. I created a multiply layer, and on that layer I painted all the shadows with one blue hue. Most of the colors are painted underneath this multiply layer on a layer that is in normal blend mode. When I wanted to punch some colors up and add highlights, I did that in the very end on a layer that is just underneath my line art and on top of everything else. The line art itself was looking very smooth compared to the texture of the colors, so I added texture to them as a clipping mask, and that clipping mask was set to overlay blend mode. And that gives the lines this sort of like a bit, not really gritty look, but more textured. Making all these details does take a whole lot of time. There's just no escaping that. But it does help if you have an end goal in mind that you think is worth all that time. I made some really expensive mistakes that took a lot of time, especially with lines in the beginning. Like for example, I drew the entire bridge and then decided to lower the camera angle, which made me redraw everything the second time just to improve the composition. But considering how long, for example, the painting process took, I don't think this was wasted time. There were all kinds of detours like this. I just want to be honest about this stuff because I don't want you to be discouraged when these things happen, as they inevitably do. Remember that when you're making art, you're exploring something new. And that process will always include a lot of searching. Instead of treating those moments as mistakes, rather think about them as a very important part of the process. You will get to the end destination if you're just willing to backtrack from all the dead ends along the way. That's just part of the process. Now a quick word about the sponsor of this video, which is Skillshare. Rather than step-by-step tutorials, the stuff that I personally enjoy watching is the work process of other people. There's a design class called Watch Me Work, Real Client Design Projects by Dylan Mirsvinsky. Oh my god, I'm sure that I just butchered that name totally. Editor Mikko, please slap an actual name here so that people can read it. In this class, Dylan shows the process of an actual client job, including the pricing, negotiation, emails, and workflow structure. If you're starting as a freelancer, I highly recommend that class and paying attention to the way client interaction with edits is structured in the pricing. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. Most classes are under 60 minutes with short lessons to fit any schedule. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. When adding the colors, I sort of realized how well this approach works for me, because we see all these interesting things all around us, all the time, even in situations that might seem ordinary or boring to other people. When you're a creative person, which I think all of us are, you see things in a unique way. When I was spending time on this bridge that I love so much, I came to realize that there are all kinds of places and situations that I could use as an inspiration in the same way. By inspiration, I mean collecting parts of those things into a piece of art that shows that experience through my own eyes and not just recreating something that already exists. Just look at your own home, for example, and the different ways that you could paint it. Not just the way that it looks, but how does your own home feel to you? Put that in a painting, or your own room, for example. What does that feeling look like in a picture? Because there's no other way for us to see it unless you make an illustration or a painting about it. And when you start looking at things this way, there's just no end to what you can do. Now I want to reveal why I wanted to make this piece and not avoid it one more year like I have until now. This railroad is about to expand with another track that is going to run alongside it. This means that huge construction is going to take place here, and one of my favorite places in the whole world and one of my favorite bridges in the whole world is going to be destroyed or replaced by something else. Now, nobody should feel sad about this because I'm all for public transportation and trains are especially cool for me. One of my favorite things is to paint in a train. So I think that's, in a bigger scheme of things, that's a good thing. But if I didn't make this illustration now, I would lose this memory. Not just how it looks, but also how it felt to be here with my dog Vivi. And of course, that's one of the main motivations for me making this video. as well. In a year, that bridge might be gone, but I can always come and watch this and see how the bridge used to look, and also see how the bridge made me feel. And I think these sort of experiences are important to share with other people, because that might make somebody out there see their surroundings in a new way too. So please don't leave this all on my shoulders, and go and make art about the things that you love. I'm Mikko, and I see you guys in the next video. Bye!